Well, today we're diving into what it means to be a Christian in the world today. Specifically, we're looking at this piece, Being a Christian in a Pluralistic Society,
Uh-huh.
from back in 92.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and even though it was written a while ago, it really gets at this fascinating shift in American culture.
It really does. And you know what always strikes me when I reread this piece? The almost shocking contrast, between university life back then and now.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine a time when Christian principles weren't just tolerated, but were like built into the very fabric of campus life.
Yeah, it's almost hard to fathom. It really is.
Yeah.
Like, picture going to university where the president's speeches sound like something you'd hear in church.
Right. And the piece even gives these specific examples, like at USC, where, get this, even the chaplain's prayers were openly Christian. Today, it's all about representing this huge spectrum of beliefs. We see everything, even like goddess worship, which is a far cry from where things stood a few decades ago.
Talk about a complete 180. It makes you wonder, how did we get here? What caused this massive shift? From a society where Christian values were practically the norm
Huh.
to this new world of pluralism.
Yeah.
And what does it all mean for someone who's trying to live out their faith in this new landscape?
It's a huge question, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack as we dig deeper into this piece. This
Yeah.
whole transition, going from privilege to pluralism, as they call it in the piece, it's not just like a change in like social norms, it's a change in how we see truth, faith, the role of religion in public life. It's big.
So we've gone, like you said, from this time where Christian values were front and center
Yeah.
to this whole new world of pluralism. It kind of makes you scratch your head a bit, right? Like, is this a good thing for Christians or a bad thing?
It's a change for sure. And anytime you have a big shift, there's going to be, some questions. But here's where it gets interesting. The piece actually says that pluralism, when you really break it down, is built on some core Christian values.
Really? Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this link between pluralism and Christian values.
Okay, so think about it this way. At its heart, pluralism is about seeing the value in every single person, no matter what they believe. It's about respecting their right to believe differently, even if you totally disagree. And that emphasis on each person's worth, on freedom of conscience, that really lines up with a Christian perspective, don't you think?
Yeah, it does.
Hmm.
But does that mean we're saying all beliefs are the same, like equally true? That feels like it could lead to, just anything goes.
Yeah.
Moral relativism and all that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's a common misunderstanding. But that's not what pluralism is about. It's not saying all beliefs are true. It's saying, hey, let's create a space where we can have respectful conversations, especially when we don't see eye to eye. It doesn't mean Christians should shy away from challenging other ideas or water down their faith. Not at all.
So it's less about everyone agreeing and more about figuring out how to respectfully live together, even with our disagreements.
Exactly. The piece is really clear on this point. Christians have every right to express their faith, to be part of the public conversation, just like anyone else. In fact, it even suggests that a society where Christian values are lived out openly is a better society, period.
Yeah, less corruption, less violence.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want that? But it's easy to feel like you're swimming upstream sometimes,
Oh, absolutely.
How do
Yeah.
we live this out practically?
Yeah, and that's why the piece goes beyond just, defining pluralism. It gives us a sort of, almost like a guidebook, or a toolkit, I guess you could say, for how Christians can not only survive, but actually thrive in this new environment.
Okay, so let's open up this Christian toolkit for living in a pluralistic world. What's the first thing we need to keep in mind?
Well, it starts by reminding us that Christianity has a long history, right? Full of persecution, full of challenges, even outright hostility.
Yeah.
Pluralism, when you put it in perspective, is relatively new.
So don't freak out.
Exactly. We've weathered storms before, and it's only made our faith stronger. This is just a different kind of challenge. Same principles apply.
That's reassuring. But this time it's not about, like, facing persecution from some empire, right?
Yeah.
It's about navigating all these different beliefs and values, lots of which might seem totally opposed to our own. So how do we even begin to approach that?
That's where this piece gets even more interesting, I think. It talks about this idea of a victimization structure that's popped up in society, especially in academia.
Victimization structure. Okay, now you have to unpack that one for me. What does that even mean?
So it's this idea that since Christianity was the dominant worldview for so long, Now there's pressure on Christians to, like, downplay their beliefs or even apologize for their faith. Like, they need to make up for past wrongs.
Oh yeah, I've felt that. This sense that we need to atone for the past by being extra quiet in the present.
Right. And the piece pushes back against that whole narrative. It's a good reminder that we have just as much right to express our faith, to engage in these discussions, to advocate for our values as anyone else, just like anyone else.
So how do we balance that? How do we hold on to our convictions, you know, stand firm in what we believe, while also respecting the right of others to disagree? That seems like the real balancing act here.
It's about finding that sweet spot between conviction and humility, I think, between speaking your truth, but also listening to the truths of others. It doesn't have to be one or the other, right? And this piece gets especially strong when it comes to facing discrimination because of your faith, especially in places like universities.
Interesting. So we shouldn't just let that go.
No, not at all. The piece actually encourages Christians to use legal means to challenge discrimination head on. It acknowledges that it might not always be easy or comfortable, but it really emphasizes the importance of standing up for your rights.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, yeah, we should be respectful of others, but we also deserve to be treated fairly ourselves and to have our beliefs respected, right? This whole idea of pushing back against discrimination, especially in these institutions that are always talking about diversity and inclusion, it's pretty powerful.
It is, and it speaks to the core of what it means to really live out your faith in a pluralistic society. It's about engaging with the culture, not hiding from it, being willing to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
This has been so insightful. Really. I mean, we've talked about pluralism as this like social idea,
Yeah.
about its honestly surprising connection to Christian values, and even about how to like practically live this out without compromising our faith. But there's still this big question hanging out there, isn't there? The elephant in the room.
You're talking about truth,
Exactly.
because that's where the piece goes next. This whole idea of whether a pluralistic society can even handle the concept of absolute truth.
Yes. Because just because we tolerate different viewpoints,
Yeah.
that doesn't magically make them all equally valid.
Exactly. And the author uses this brilliant analogy to illustrate this point. Imagine for a second that your car has run out of gas.
Okay, picture it. Got it.
Now, you can believe as hard as you want that your gas tank is full. You can even convince yourself it's true.
Huh?
But that belief, it won't change the reality of the situation. Your car's not going anywhere.
Oof, that hits a little too close to home. I can't tell you how many times I've been completely, like, delusionally optimistic about my gas gauge,
Right.
only to be totally wrong.
Right. It's a universal experience. And the author's point is that the same principle applies to how we see the world, including our religious beliefs. Just because we want something to be true doesn't mean it is.
That is such a powerful and humbling thought. So how does that apply to Christianity specifically? How does this idea of absolute truth work in a world that seems to prize tolerance above all else? Because we're in this world that's all about tolerance. But does that come at the cost of truth? Especially with faith like Christianity that makes some pretty big claims.
That's the dilemma, isn't it? And the piece really digs into that. Like it takes on this idea that faith and facts are somehow opposites. This idea that when you walk into a church, you have to leave your brain at the door.
Right. Like faith is all about blind belief and reason is for like science and logic and stuff.
Exactly. But the author, they challenge that whole separation. They say that Christianity, at its core, is making a statement about the world, a truth claim. When we say Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, it's not just like a personal opinion. It's saying this is objectively true.
It's one or the other, right? It's either true for everyone or it's not true at all.
Exactly. And that can be a tough pill to swallow, especially in a world that wants to say everyone's truth is equally valid.
It's like that C.S. Lewis quote, right?
Yeah.
Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important.
Nailed it. It's a faith that demands to be taken seriously because it's dealing with the biggest questions we face as humans. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens after we die? These aren't just, abstract ideas to debate. They impact how we live our lives.
For sure. So how do we hold on to this idea of absolute truth, this belief that our faith is objectively true, while also living in a world that values tolerance and inclusivity? How do we make those two things work together?
That's where the piece takes this really inspiring turn, actually. It introduces this idea of a modern-day Mount Carmel moment.
Okay, for those of us who might need a little refresher on our Old Testament stories, what exactly went down at Mount Carmel?
Right. So In First Kings, you've got the prophet Elijah going head-to-head with the prophets of Baal. This epic showdown, like two totally different worldviews, two completely different understandings of God.
And to make it even more dramatic, they set up this test, right?
Yeah.
Both Elijah and these prophets built altars, and they're going to call down fire from heaven.
Yes. And Elijah, he takes it even further. He has them drench his altar with water. Like he's putting himself at a disadvantage on purpose.
hmm
But then God shows up big time. Fire falls from the sky, consumes Elijah's sacrifice, and it's undeniable proof of who the true God is.
It's one of those stories you just don't forget. This, like, undeniable display of power. No room for doubt.
And the author's point is that, in a way, we're living in a similar time. Like the truth of our faith is being tested out in the open for everyone to see. We're surrounded by different voices, different ways of seeing the world, and can feel like we're always having to defend what we believe.
So are you saying that instead of being afraid of this pluralistic world, we should see it as an opportunity, like a chance to show the truth of our faith in a way that's as undeniable as that fire from heaven?
Exactly. And it's not about just winning arguments or proving we're right. It's about letting the way we live speak for itself, reflecting God's love, His grace, His truth in a way that connects with a world that's searching for meaning.
That's powerful. It's not about forcing people to see things our way, but living in a way that shows what we believe is real.
Yes, it's in those everyday moments, the way we treat people, the choices we make, how we interact with the world around us. That's where the real beauty and power of our faith shines through.
This has been such an amazing conversation. To wrap things up for our listeners today, what's the one thing we want them to walk away with?
Don't shy away from the challenge of living in a pluralistic world. See it as a chance to go deeper in your faith, to live it out authentically and boldly, and to be a light in a world that desperately needs it.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into what it means to be a Christian in a pluralistic world. Until next time, keep seeking truth, keep asking the tough questions, and keep living out your faith with courage and compassion.